July 15, 1971. Washington, D.C. The sound of a pen scratching across paper. Richard Nixon's hand trembles slightly as he signs an executive order that will change the world. The end of the gold standard. Outside, the American flag ripples in summer wind. Inside, an empire quietly shifts from solid gold to printed promise. No armies invade, no cities burn. But make no mistake, this is how empires die. History tells us collapse never begins with explosions. It begins with decisions made in offices by confident men who think they've beaten the laws of economics. Rome thought it was immune when it debased its silver. Spain thought its mountains of gold could last forever. Britain believed the pound would never fall. The Soviet Union thought tanks could outlast truth. And today, the United States stands where they once stood, at stage 5 of the 7-stage collapse pattern. The pattern that has destroyed every major empire in the last 2,000 years. The same rhythm, expansion, debt, inflation, and denial, repeated like a tragic song. But how does it happen? How do great nations, rich, proud, unstoppable, quietly engineer their own downfall? This is the story of that pattern. The mathematics of imperial decay are told through for empires that all believed they were different. You are watching the 7-stage collapse pattern. Spain, Britain, USSR, and the United States, now at stage 5. Cue the slow rise of orchestral music. A Roman coin fades into a Spanish galleon, into a British pound, into a modern dollar bill fluttering in digital wind. Every empire has its moment of glory. Potosi, 1545. A cold wind whips across the Andes as a group of exhausted miners stare at a mountain that glitters under the sun. They call it Cerro Rico, the rich hill. Inside this mountain lies so much silver that it will fund empires, ignite wars, reshape Europe, and quietly destroy Spain from within. The first pickaxe hits the rock. The echo rolls down the valley like a prophecy. For Spain, this is the beginning of stage 1, dominance. The moment an empire feels invincible. By the late 1500s, silver from the New World is pouring into Sevillian rivers, chests packed so tightly they creak under their own weight. Spanish galleons unload bullion worth more than any kingdom had ever seen. To the world, Spain appears unstoppable. The Spanish real becomes the first global reserve currency. Merchants in Amsterdam, Istanbul, and Beijing carry Spanish silver in their belts like treasure. But beneath the glitter, a rot is forming. Spain enters stage 2, overextension. King Philip II, dazzled by wealth, makes the same mistake every empire makes. He confuses money with strength. He fights wars across 4 continents. Against the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean. Against the Netherlands, the richest province in Europe. Against England on the high seas. Against rebels in Italy. Against pirates, rivals, religious enemies, imaginary enemies. Every battlefield burns silver. But silver is plentiful, and that is exactly the problem. The more Spain receives, the more it spends. The more it spends, the more it borrows. The more it borrows, the more it dreams. Spain forgets the simplest rule in economics. Money without production is not wealth. It is illusion. Europe is being flooded with Spanish silver. Prices rise. Bread that cost 1 silver coin now costs 2, then 3, then 6. The value of money collapses in real time, the world's first major inflation crisis. Spain has entered stage 3, deficit spending without even noticing it. By 1557, Spain owes so much money that it does the unthinkable. The richest empire on earth, bankrupt. But Spain does not stop. They borrow again, and default again, and again, and again, for defaults in 40 years. This leads to stage 4, currency debasement. Spain begins minting cheaper coins, less silver, more copper, same face value. Merchants laugh at these coins. They refuse them. Spain's credibility collapses before its empire does. Silver, once Spain's blessing, has become a curse. Because while Spain built palaces, France built factories. While Spain imported luxury goods, England built ships. While Spain relaxed into wealth, the Netherlands innovated into the future. The world is changing. Spain is not. And then, the final blow. Cerro Rico's silver production declines. The mountain is still rich, but no longer infinite. Spain realizes too late it has built an empire on a resource it never controlled, never respected, and never understood. By the 1600s, Spain enters stage 5, inflation and collapse of productive capacity. Manufacturing dies. Agriculture shrinks. The economy withers. People flee. The empire fractures. Spain, once the master of oceans, becomes a tourist postcard. The pattern begins in arrogance, grows in denial, and ends in silence. And another empire rises to take its place, the one that believes it will be the first to escape history. August 4th, 1914. London. The bells of Westminster ring through a grey sky as crowds gather outside Whitehall. Britain has just declared war on Germany. Men cheer. Flags wave. No one realizes they are cheering for the beginning of their empire's end. Where Spain drowned in silver, Britain will drown in debt. For 200 years, Britain had mastered global finance. The pound sterling was as good as gold, literally. £1 meant one fixed, unshakable amount of gold. Trust in British currency was so absolute that nations stored their wealth in London like a global vault. This was stage 1. Dominance at its peak. A quarter of the world lived under the Union Jack. The British Navy ruled every ocean. Trade routes flowed through London like veins carrying wealth from every direction. But the empire had grown too large to sustain. Defending India, Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia required everything Britain had. And when World War I ignited, Britain stepped into stage 2. Overextension with the confidence of a superpower that thought its strength was permanent. The war devoured money faster than any conflict before it. Britain sent gold to the United States in shiploads to pay for weapons, food, fuel. The vaults of the Bank of England began to empty. Within a year, Britain quietly suspended the gold standard, a move that would have signaled crisis had the world known. But crisis doesn't hit like thunder. It arrives softly, disguised as necessity. By 1918, Britain had borrowed so much from America that the roles reversed. The empire that once funded the world became the world's debtor. Then came a fatal mistake. In 1925, under Winston Churchill, Britain tried to restore the pound to its pre-war strength, to the old gold exchange rate, to the myth of British invincibility. But the pound was now a ghost, polished on the outside, hollow within. This act locked Britain into a currency too strong for its weakened economy. Factories shut down. Millions of workers lost jobs. Britain had entered stage 3, deficit spending just to stay afloat, borrowing to defend a currency that no longer reflected reality. By 1931, the illusion shattered. Britain was forced off the gold standard permanently. The pound sank 25% in days. Confidence, built over centuries, evaporated in a week. This triggered stage for currency debasement and a spiral of debt that Britain could never escape. But history delivered its cruelest blow in 1939. Another world war, another tidal wave of borrowing, another mortgaging of the future. By 1945, Britain's national debt had exploded to 270% of GDP. Cities lay in ruins. The economy was exhausted, and the empire, the largest in human history, was no longer financially defendable. Between 1947 and 1970, Britain lost India, Palestine, Egypt, Malaysia, Kenya, Nigeria, territory after territory slipping away, not in rebellion, but in economic necessity. The empire didn't die from invasion, it died from invoices. Then came humiliation. In 1949, the pound was devalued. In 1967, devalued again. By the 1970s, inflation hit 25%. Strikes paralyzed the country. Britain begged the IMF for a bailout. The global reserve currency holder reduced to a borrower of last resort. This was stage 5, loss of confidence and imperial collapse. The nation that had built railways across continents now struggled to keep its lights on. Power erodes slowly, then disappears all at once. But as Britain faded, another empire rose, one that believed ideology could replace economics, one that expanded in the shadows of the Cold War, one whose collapse would be faster, sharper, and politically explosive. Moscow, March 1985. Snow falls in thick, cold sheets across Red Square. Inside the Kremlin, Mikhail Gorbachev, young, energetic, hopeful, walks into a meeting room lined with portraits of Soviet leaders. Each portrait stares down like a warning. Power fades, but denial lasts forever. The Soviet Union looks strong from the outside. Missiles, tanks, satellites, a superpower locked in a duel with the United States. But inside, something is breaking. Where Spain drowned in silver and Britain drowned in debt, the USSR is drowning in its own delusion. This is stage 1, military overextension at its most extreme. For decades, the USSR tried to match America weapon for weapon, base for base, influence for influence. But with an economy half the size and growing slower every year. They propped up Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea, Ethiopia, Syria, Afghanistan. They were fighting capitalism everywhere, all at once. The cost was catastrophic. The Soviet military consumed 15 to 20% of GDP, more than triple the burden Britain carried at its peak. Factories built tanks instead of tractors, rocket engines instead of refrigerators, warheads instead of wealth. Then came stage 2, economic stagnation. By the 1970s, the Soviet economy stopped growing completely. Factories produced low-quality goods no one wanted. Food shortages became normal. A nation with some of the richest farmland on earth was importing grain, just to avoid famine. Across the USSR, people stood in endless lines for soap, shoes, and sugar, not because the country lacked resources, but because its system lacked incentive. No competition, no innovation, no accountability. Then came the blow no superpower can withstand. The collapse of real money. The ruble was not a currency. Not truly. It wasn't trusted internationally. Even Soviet citizens hid dollars under mattresses, because dollars held value, and rubles didn't. This was stage 3, currency failure. The USSR needed gold and oil to buy imports. But in 1985, oil prices crashed. Gold reserves dwindled. Suddenly, the Soviet Union, a nuclear superpower, couldn't afford to buy grain, machinery, or basic consumer goods. And then, the pressure ruptured. 1989 Berlin. The wall falls. Crowds cheer. Soldiers watch helplessly. One by one, the Soviet satellite states break away. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany. The Soviet sphere of influence collapses without a single shot fired. This is stage 4, loss of empire. And once empire goes, legitimacy follows. The USSR was running on borrowed time and borrowed money. Both had run out. What happens next is the fastest great power collapse in modern history. From the fall of the Berlin Wall to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, 900 days. A superpower disappears in less than 3 years. Economies freeze. Savings evaporate. The ruble becomes worthless. Factories close. Armies go unpaid. Nuclear weapons sit in warehouses with no one to guard them. On December 26, 1991, the red flag over the Kremlin is lowered for the last time. The Soviet Union, which once controlled half of Europe, ceases to exist. No war, no invasion, just economic death. The pattern repeats. Overextension, stagnation, currency collapse, empire loss, total breakdown. Spain took a century. Britain took 50 years. The USSR took less than 2. The speed changes. The sequence never does. And now, this same pattern, the pattern that destroyed 3 superpowers, is unfolding in a 4th. One that believes it is untouchable. One that believes history has ended. One that believes the rules no longer apply. The United States, standing at stage 5. The Washington, D.C., autumn 2025. The Capitol dome glows under a fading orange sky. It looks eternal, marble, classical, invincible. But beneath the surface, the foundations are trembling in ways most Americans cannot yet feel and cannot imagine. Because the United States, the world's most powerful nation, the issuer of the global reserve currency, is now at stage 5 of the same collapse pattern that destroyed Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. And the danger is sharper than any empire before it. Because America's currency isn't regional, it is global. When it falters, the world shakes. Let's trace how we arrived here. Stage 1. Dominance, 1944 to 1971. Bretton Woods made the US dollar the center of the global financial system. Gold-backed, trusted, universal. The United States controlled half the world's manufacturing, half the world's gold, and possessed unmatched military power. For a moment in history, America became what Rome once was, the default power of the earth. Stage 2. Overextension, 1980s, 2000s. Military bases in 70-plus countries, 750 installations worldwide. Full commitments to NATO, Korea, Japan, the Middle East, and increasingly to the Pacific against China. Wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. $8 trillion spent in 2 decades. Like Spain fighting on for continents. Like Britain defending an empire too large to hold. Like the USSR matching an enemy too expensive to match. America began spending more than it earned simply to maintain its level of influence. This is the moment every empire believes it is too important to fail. Stage 3. Deficit spending. 2000s to 2020. Debt becomes the default. Year after year, the US government ran trillion-dollar deficits. Even in peacetime, even in economic expansion, America did what every empire does when ambition exceeds income. It borrowed tomorrow to pay for today. In 1980, the national debt was $900 billion. By 2000, $5 trillion. By 2020, $27 trillion. The curve was no longer rising, it was accelerating. Stage 4. Currency debasement. 2008 to 2023. When borrowing wasn't enough, the printing began. Quantitative easing created trillions from nothing. Then COVID hit. For $1 trillion printed in 2 years, more than in the entire previous century. Like Rome diluting silver, like Spain flooding Europe with mined bullion, like Britain abandoning gold, America transformed the dollar from a stable unit of value into a political tool. The consequences came fast. Inflation, asset bubbles, dollar distrust, global alternatives rising. But this is where the pattern turns dangerous. Stage 5. Loss of productive capacity and social stability. 2020 to 2025. This is the stage empires rarely escape. Factories moved overseas. Supply chains hollowed out. The US became dependent on imports for electronics, pharmaceuticals, steel, even for parts of its own military equipment. Meanwhile, society began to fracture. Trust in institutions hits multi-decade lows. Cities struggle with homelessness and crime. Addiction and mental health crises surge. Political polarization reaches breaking points. Infrastructure crumbles. Fertility drops. Life expectancy stalls. This is the Spanish pattern, decline masked by denial. This is the British pattern, a superpower living on old prestige. This is the Soviet pattern, a society cracking before its leaders notice. And as America stands in stage 5, the next stages are already visible on the horizon. Stage 5, loss of productive capacity and social stability, 2020 to 2025. This is the stage empires rarely escape. Factories moved overseas. Supply chains hollowed out. The US became dependent on imports for electronics, pharmaceuticals, steel, even for parts of its own military equipment. Meanwhile, society began to fracture. Trust in institutions hits multi-decade lows. Cities struggle with homelessness and crime. Addiction and mental health crises surge. Political polarization reaches breaking points. Infrastructure crumbles. Fertility drops. Life expectancy stalls. This is the Spanish pattern, decline masked by denial. This is the British pattern, a superpower living on old prestige. This is the Soviet pattern, a society cracking before its leaders notice. And as America stands in stage 5, the next stages are already visible on the horizon. Stage 7, collapse. The final stage. History shows collapse is never slow. It is sudden, faster than anyone expects. Rome took decades. Britain took 20 years. The USSR took 900 days. The United States? No one knows. But the math is clear. The pattern is identical, and the world can feel the tremor in the ground. An empire does not collapse when its enemies grow strong. It collapses when its fundamentals grow weak, while its leaders still insist nothing is wrong. And this is where we stand today. The true question, the one history demands we answer, is not whether the pattern is real. It is whether the United States can do what no empire before it has done. Break the pattern. The lesson: how empires break the pattern or die trying. New York City. Present day. Night settles over Manhattan like a curtain of glass and light. From the 80th floor of a skyscraper, the world looks calm. Steel towers, blinking skylines, rivers of headlights flowing like arteries through a living giant. This is the illusion every empire feels just before the fall. Look at the skyline. Nothing could ever go wrong. But history whispers a different truth. Every empire before the United States believed the same thing, right up until the moment the pattern closed around them like a fist. And yet, there is something the United States still has that Spain, Britain, and the USSR did not. Time to choose. Time to act. Time to break the cycle that has repeated for 2,000 years. But only if we understand the pattern, not as fate, but as warning. Lesson 1. Money is not wealth. Production is wealth. Spain drowned in gold. Britain drowned in debt. America is drowning in printed dollars. What do all three have in common? They mistook currency for strength. Every empire that survives reinvents its productive engine. Japan did it in the 1950s. Germany did it twice. South Korea did it in one generation. America must do the same. Rebuild manufacturing. Reclaim supply chains. Invest in real industries, not just speculation. Empires fall when the numbers rise, but the foundation weakens. Lesson 2. Military power without economic power is a mirage. The USSR proved this ruthlessly. Tanks mean nothing if you can't feed your people. Missiles mean nothing if the currency backing them collapses. Bases mean nothing if you borrow money to build them. America still has overwhelming military dominance, but the pattern warns us: if the economy breaks, the military follows, not the other way around. Power comes from production. Stability comes from balance. Sustainability comes from restraint. All empires fall from the inside first. Rome rotted before the Visigoths arrived. Britain decayed before Suez exposed it. The USSR collapsed before a single shot was fired. America's greatest threat is not China, not Russia, not external enemies. It is internal exhaustion, institutional distrust, social fragmentation, political tribalism, economic inequality, declining life expectancy. Empires die when the people stop believing in the story of the nation. If America wants to break the cycle, it must rebuild that story, not with slogans, with trust. Lesson 4. Reserve currencies die slowly, then all at once. Spain had global silver. Britain had the gold-backed pound. The USSR had an ideological empire built on forced loyalty. All collapsed when the world lost trust in their currency, the symbol of their power. The dollar still dominates, but signs are emerging. Gold buying at record highs. BRICS forming alternative payment systems. Oil being sold in non-dollar currencies. US debt repeatedly hitting ceilings. Foreign nations reducing US bond holdings. The pattern is not predicting collapse. It is warning collapse becomes inevitable if trust is lost. Empire is not built on armies. Empire is built on confidence. Lesson 5. The pattern can be broken, but only through disruption. Here is the truth every historian understands. Empires do not decline because they are defeated. They decline because they refuse to change. America still has unmatched assets, global innovation leadership, deep capital markets, immigrant-driven creativity, entrepreneurial culture, strong demographics relative to Europe and China, natural resource abundance, dollar dominance, still intact. But these strengths only matter if the country chooses transformation over denial. Breaking the pattern requires fiscal discipline, monetary restraint, industrial revival, political stability, social cohesion, strategic humility, not small changes, civilizational changes, the final warning, and the final hope. History is not a prophecy. It is a mirror. Spain looked into that mirror and saw glory, not decay. Britain saw prestige, not exhaustion. The USSR saw ideology, not collapse. The United States now stands before the same mirror, the same reflection, the same choice. Repeat history or rewrite it. The most powerful empire in human history is approaching the point where the pattern demands resolution. But for the first time ever, because of global information, technological maturity, and economic interconnectedness, an empire might finally understand the rules before they become fatal, and that knowledge is the lifeline. As the camera pans across the American skyline, across ports, factories, boardrooms, farms, and families, one truth emerges. Empires collapse when they ignore history. They endure when they confront it. The world is not watching the end of America. The world is watching the most important test any nation has ever faced. Can the United States break the 7-stage collapse pattern? Or will it become the next chapter in history's longest, most predictable story? The answer has not been written. The pattern has spoken. Now, the nation must speak back.